Welcome back to the channel. For the uninitiated, this series is basically Advanced Theodore Roosevelt Studies class. This week we'll be looking back into the archives to discuss two different but interesting episodes from the life of Theodore Roosevelt. The first is an obscure moment from his administration, where he tried to mandate a spelling change to hundreds of words, and the other is an exploration into why Theodore Roosevelt hated Winston Churchill. But without further ado, let's begin with a tale of simplified spelling. Have you ever noticed that in the English language there are a lot of words with silent letters in them? Consider the word crumb, for instance. You definitely wouldn't be blamed if you were like, why in the Sam Hill is there a B at the end? Wouldn't it make more sense if it was removed and spelled as crumb? Well, the academics at Columbia University certainly thought so. In 1906, their Simplified Spelling Board published a list of 300 new spelling suggestions for words. Partisan became partisan, thorough became thorough, and dropped became dropped. A little strange, right? This spelling reform movement was funded by steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, who thought that through the elimination of confusing spellings, English would become the dominant language globally. Additionally, Carnegie thought that an easier, universal spelling could bind the United States and Britain together, as well as make it easier for immigrants to assimilate to the language. And some of these new spellings would actually survive to this day. I highlighted the weirder ones, but there were also changes like favorite to favorite, quartet to quartet, and somber to somber. Enter Theodore Roosevelt. That summer, he decided to hop on the trend and lent his full support by commanding in a letter to the government printing office that all documents from the executive departments of the United States were to be written under the Simplified Spelling Board's recommendations. Roosevelt justified himself, saying that there is not the slightest intention to do anything revolutionary or initiate any far-reaching policy. The purpose, simply, is for the government, instead of lagging behind popular sentiment, to advance abreast of it, and at the same time abreast of the views of the ablest and most practical educators of our time, as well as the most profound scholars. It is merely an attempt to cast what slight weight can properly be cast on the side of the popular forces, which are endeavoring to make our spelling a little less foolish and fantastic. The media had a field day with all of this. Satire after sarcastic satire were being pumped out to the maximum. Roosevelt, or Mr. Roosevelt as the media mockingly called him, was ridiculed for trying to mandate spelling changes. Some even said he was waging war on the English language itself. Roosevelt also saw heavy resistance from institutions such as the Supreme Court, whose judges, after reading and writing in one way for their entire lives, weren't about to suddenly change their ways and adopt a new set of spellings. But the real death knell to the president's efforts was the House of Representatives, when they decisively ruled that money for the printing of documents was only to be given to those strictly under standard English. Roosevelt was left with no choice but to repeal his order, which he surprisingly did graciously and in good spirits. As for the Simplified Spelling Board, their cause obviously took a major hit, but they continued their effort until 1920, when their funding ran out after the death of Carnegie. But what about you? Are you any good at spelling? Is that even a relevant skill in the time of automatic spell checks? I know there's an active conversation among educators today about a return to phonics in regard to learning and reading and whatnot. Anyway, now that we have covered the case of simplified spelling, let us continue on to our second story, about TR's animosity toward Winston Churchill. Theodore Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, American President and British Prime Minister. Two of the most prominent men of the 20th century. You definitely already know them. You probably even saw their rap battle. But did you know that they actually met once? Or that Roosevelt thought rather poorly of Churchill? It's true. The two had their only in-person meeting in December of 1900. The 26-year-old Churchill was in the U.S. to deliver lectures about his experiences in South Africa, a country where he had been held as prisoner of war until he pulled off an escape. Churchill had been elected for the first time to political office, just 2 months before he met the then governor of New York, Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt was gearing up to accept his duties as William McKinley's vice president in a few months, which, as it turned out, meant that in under a year he would himself become president. Anyway, at the end of the year 1900, Roosevelt and Churchill met over a private dinner. And surprisingly, almost nothing is known about it. Churchill never mentioned it in any of his correspondence. But for Roosevelt, who was eager enough to invite the Englishman to dine in the first place, whatever happened at that dinner evidently soured him. From that moment on, Roosevelt had very negative things to say about Churchill. Invariably, whenever anyone mentioned Churchill in a conversation or letter, Roosevelt would give a snide remark and express his disapproval of the man. For instance, in 1906, Churchill published a 2-volume biography of his father, the politician Lord Randolph Churchill. Roosevelt read the work and said of it that, "I have been over Winston Churchill's life of his father. I dislike the father and dislike the son, so I may be prejudiced. Still, I feel that while the biographer and his subject possess some real far-sightedness, they both possess, or possessed, such levity, lack of sobriety, lack of permanent principle, and an inordinate thirst for the cheap form of admiration which is given to notoriety, as to make them poor public servants." If that seems kind of out of left field, that's because it is. Roosevelt said that Churchill was unprincipled and obsessed with fame, and that he dislikes him. That's pretty much as far as TR goes in explaining his feelings about the Brit. Theodore Roosevelt's son, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., also wound up reading the same biography a couple years later, and Roosevelt Sr. wasted no time once again launching invectives against the Churchills. That is an interesting book of Winston Churchill's about his father, but I can't help feeling about both of them that the older one was a rather cheap character, and the younger one is a rather cheap character. Alrighty then, for what it's worth, this antipathy appeared to be one-sided. Churchill seemed to have no problem with Roosevelt, and likely did not even know that there was any bad blood between them. When Roosevelt went hunting in Africa in his post-presidency, Churchill sent him a copy of his own recent travelogue in that continent, which TR actually begrudgingly enjoyed. Outside of that, there is not much else to their historical crossover. They never met when Roosevelt was in Europe, giving speeches and representing the U.S. at King Edward VII's funeral. In 1918, less than a year before Roosevelt died, Churchill submitted the famous Rough Rider as a potential ambassador to Vladimir Lenin's Russia, but that obviously never came to fruition. But overall, what do you think about their rocky relationship? Do you think it was the dire circumstances that enabled Franklin Roosevelt to later appreciate Winston Churchill more than Theodore Roosevelt did? Or were there larger interpersonal issues at play here that would have always prevented a positive impression from TR of Churchill? Whatever the case, that brings us to the end of the video. If you like this content, please hit that subscribe button and consider leaving a comment. There's plenty more Roosevelt videos to come, but there may be a few weeks break on the subject. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you have a good one.